thank you everyone for coming tonight. To me, it was funny because when Vince asked me to talk tonight, I kind of went, I don't know what to talk about. And he said we can talk about anything, which is kind of scary. And I said, I really wanted to talk about something that I'm really passionate about and something that I believe in, rather than necessarily talking about something kind of to do with the industry, like technical, to do with strategy. And so I don't know, it just came to me that I wanted to talk about this subject about mindfulness and about what it means in a world that I think we're all finding is becoming quite overwhelming with the amount of information and imagery and everything that's in front of us all the time. And I think, like, I truly believe that everyone is creative. I don't believe that some people are more creative and some people aren't. I think that everybody is a creative. But I think for those of us, and I'm sure there are lots of us in this room who make our professions out of being creative, mindfulness and meditation is particularly important because we really need to invest in our minds because it kind of is our key tool. And I guess the thing that I'm seeing happening more and more is that we decide to be creative because we get great joy out of creativity, we get great joy out of the creative process. Like there's a wonderful feeling of, of processing a brief, of coming up with something creative. But when we choose to do this as a profession, there's a lot of pressure. And often you're kind of going, how do I produce something that's going to be amazing, that's going to answer the brief, that's going to work for the client paid, and all this sort of stuff. And so you often feel like you're under a lot of pressure. And so there's often a lot of temptation to go, why don't I just have a look at what other people have done in the same situation? And so you go online and you kind of start trawling the internet for ideas, and then you suddenly find that your brain's actually being polluted. And then you've got so many other people's ideas already in your mind that you don't have them in a space anymore to think about your own thing and to actually reconnect with your own source of creativity and to actually pull that creative joy, I would say, out of yourself. So I guess what I want to talk about tonight, rather than it being an anti-internet talk, and it's been interesting because in saying that I wanted to talk about this subject, lots of people have come up to me and talked about it and said, one of my friends said, I think your talk's really elitist. And I said, what are you talking about? She's going, well, like going online, saying you can't go online, I think that's elitist. Like everyone should be allowed to go online and find, information and everything. I'm going, it's not an anti-internet talk. Everyone is welcome to the internet, But I think it's more about a creative process talk, and it's rather being an anti-internet talk, it's more a pro-yourself talk and a what are the techniques we can use to get into ourselves, because you do need techniques. It's not something that you can just naturally wake up sometimes and do. And so what are these tools that we can use and how can they help us not only become better as creatives, but also hopefully become better as people, because fundamentally that's what this sort of process can do. So I started thinking about this talk, and I already had the subject, and I wanted to talk about the mind, I wanted to talk about creativity in the mind. And then, as creative things tend to come to you, I just noticed this thing, and everyone knows I work at Frost, so it's not that surprising, but I just noticed that the word in is actually in the word mind. And it's kind of like this clue to us. I'm like, wow, it's already there. In our minds is the word in that we need to turn in. But then I noticed that also in is in the word think, and that it's actually in the center of the word think. That it's telling us it's about going in. And then I noticed it's also a word brain. I thought, this has got to be more than a coincidence. And so you'll excuse me if I do a very Frost-like thing tonight and thin my talk around words that have the word in them, because I do think that these words are giving us a clue. So let's talk about the subject of mindfulness. It is in there. So what is mindfulness? So I guess a lot of people are probably aware of the mindfulness movement. It's a movement that's really emerging at the moment, and actually someone said to me, everyone's coming to because meditation suddenly become trendy, and I'm going, wow, how can this really ancient kind of tradition suddenly be trendy? But I'm glad it is. But there is what's called a mindfulness movement that's definitely emerging at the moment, and it's something that's being associated with the positive psychology movement. And I guess what it's being based around is the fact that we can do much more research now into the brain. There's much more capability to do things like mental imagery, and there's much more capability to measure the impact of things like meditation and mindfulness on the brain. And so from the mindfulness movement, what's being found is that mindfulness or meditation is actually very, very helpful, particularly for a lot of mental illnesses that traditionally drugs would be used for, so things like depression, anxiety. There's more and more awareness that mindfulness is something that can be used to help address those things, and particularly mindfulness in the form of meditation. And tonight I'm going to talk mainly about mindfulness in the context of meditation and what that can do for you and how it can actually enhance your creative abilities. So before before we get too much into that, I just want to show of hands, has anybody in this room ever meditated? Okay. And now I want to ask you, how often have you meditated? Like, who here meditates every day? Yay! Go team. Okay. But who here has kind of had the experience when you go and you go to a great retreat and you learn all about meditation, you feel fantastic, and then you go back to real life and it's like, okay, that's great, but it doesn't last, you know. And I think that's an experience for a lot of us, that meditation and mindfulness is seen as something that you kind of do when you get away from everyday life. But that's actually not the best way to approach mindfulness and meditation. So I was lucky a few months ago to go to Japan, and I went to this temple which is called Shinkoin, and this is another coincidence that I thought was pretty amazing. And I met this monk at Shinkoin, and I have to kind of turn to my notes because I can't pronounce his name without referring to it. So it was Takafumi Kawakami. And Takafumi Kawakami is an amazing monk. He's a Zen monk, and his family have been resident within this temple for many, many generations. He's a Zen practitioner, obviously, and monk. And he actually works with UCLA, was working with UCLA on the impact of meditation on the brain. And in this talk that he gave, which was a very humble, simple talk, because obviously he's a Zen practitioner, so it's not going to be too showy, he just talked about the fact that meditation should be something that we should all feel we can just incorporate into our daily life. And that's something that we should really just think about as something that we just do every day. And he said the problem with meditation is for Westerners, and most of us in this room come from a Western culture, is that people they get fixated on meditation the same way that they come at things like Christianity. And so they want to imbue it with all of the kind of iconography and ritual and all that sort of complication that is in Christianity. And the other thing they do is they suddenly become incredibly competitive. And it's like, not only do I meditate 4 hours every day, and I meditate in the morning and I meditate at night. And suddenly, for anyone who's not familiar with meditation, that becomes really intimidating. Like, oh my God, I'm never going to be able to meditate. And I think it's really interesting. And one of my family friends is actually a really amazing Tibetan Buddhist monk. And he talks about, because he runs a centre in Lewisham, and he talks about these people who come into his centre and they really want to master it. They're going to master it. And they go away and they read everything, they read the Tibetan book of living in time, and they get into it. And then they start talking to him about the practices they've done, and how they're mastering all this stuff. And he says, and so many times he said, they'll talk to me about how they've done this really, really high practice that even the most elevated of Tibetan monks are really afraid to try, because these things are kind of almost dangerous. But to them, they kind of have to make it a competitive thing, like they're kind of getting it right, And so I think this is a real problem, because for many of us, we haven't been raised with Buddhist doctrine, we haven't been raised with meditation as part of our daily life, so it's quite intimidating, how do I get into meditation? And so I think this is one of the reasons why it's very, very good that people have started to talk about meditation in the context of mindfulness, because it should be neutral of any particular religion. It doesn't have to be a religious doctrine. So the other thing I learned from Takafumi Kawakami, it's getting easier to say, is that you should think about meditation like a vitamin for your brain. And when you think about vitamins, they work best when you take them daily. And he said, just think about it like a vitamin. And even if you only do it for 5 minutes a day, it's still going to be beneficial to your brain. And the thing that he also said is it's really, really important, as I mentioned before, to not feel you have to go on a retreat, or to not feel that you can't just do it as part of your everyday life. And that if you just start with 5 minutes a day and you do that well, that's good enough. It's better than doing nothing. So this kind of leads me to the fact that what happens is we have to make inhabiting our minds a habit. It has to become something that you do every day. And what I think that's really important in this is that we really need it to counteract a lot of the other habits that we're all developing. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I am definitely an eye addict. I get up in the morning and I can't help it. I have to check my emails. Sometimes in the wrong places, like I'll steal the toilet checking my emails. It's terrible. I am addicted. And what I'm finding is the more that I have that addiction to my phone, to my email, to my Facebook, to all this sort of stuff, it's actually really impacting on my mind. It's actually really impacting my ability to be still, to focus, to actually get into things in a deep way, because we're kind of getting into this really superficial patterns of behaviour that are little bits of lots of things all the time. So I think it's really, really important to start, as I said, making this thing a habit that you just kind of incorporate into your everyday life. And so I guess the key thing here is that you have to look at this like it's training, like you're an athlete and like you're an athlete in training. And what it enables you to do is over time you get this ability to kind of see directly and concretely how the mind functions. And when you get this understanding, it makes you more pliable, it makes you able to use your brain in a more pliable way, so you actually master your own mind better. And I think a lot of people think, oh, people who haven't encountered meditation or have had a bad experience with it, that it has some connotation of brainwashing or that you kind of have to subjugate your mind in some way. And that's not at all what's involved. It's actually more that you have to think of your brain as equipment. And if you think about an athlete and how they approach the body, like they don't expect to run a sprint without training. They expect to actually get the body ready, do all the practice, eat the right food, and then when the time comes that they have to run that sprint, the training that they've done means that they can run really fast. Well, meditation and mindfulness practice is the same thing for our brain. We have to be getting our mind ready. It's interesting, I've read things and people kind of call it the push-up for the brain. It's the thing that you need to be doing. It's the thing that you're doing all the time that's getting your brain ready so that when you do need to deliver that creativity, you've kind of prepared yourself. You've got the muscle ready. You've worked out and you're ready so that when the heat's on, your brain can fire. Okay, so then talking about the brain, and I was mentioning before the fact that what we're seeing is because of the advances in mental imaging and all these sorts of things, what they're actually able to do now is to prove the impact of meditation on the brain. So obviously the Tibetans and the people who have been meditating for many, many generations already knew that because they could see it in how they felt and they could see it in how it made them feel and they could see it in how they could interact with people. But we haven't really had the evidence before, and now there's much, much more evidence that's emerging to actually prove the impact that meditation has on the brain. And some of the things that are really important in terms of how meditation does impact the brain, two of the things that are quite critical is that first, that meditation is actually a push-up for the brain. Okay, so now we're all saying, okay, it's all very well, we have to stand up there and say, I need to do this every day, and it's really easy, but, you know, I can't fit it in. I can't make the time for it because I'm just too busy. I'm doing all this other stuff and, you know, it's just not going to happen. And I guess what I want to say is, based on my personal experience, when I do actually make the time to meditate, I can really feel the difference. Like it actually does make a tangible difference. And when I think about all the time I get caught down the rabbit warren of Facebook, where I'm often just in there and I haven't even thought about how long I've been on there and I'm posting stuff and I'm looking at what all my friends are doing and I'm just filling in time. And I think about maybe the 5 minutes I've invested on that and the return it brings me relative to a 5 minutes I might have invested in meditation. And I think, you know, it's really well worth the time to dedicate some time every day to this. And I think the thing that I'm finding, and I don't know if everybody else is finding this, but our lives are just becoming so hectic. They're becoming more and more hectic. And it's almost like we're making them so hectic that we're avoiding this risk of going inside ourselves, of finding out who we are. Because there's just so much distraction. There's so much other things that you can be kind of distracting yourself with that you don't actually go inside. It was really interesting because at this lecture I went to in Japan, one of the things that people asked this month was, well, isn't listening to music the same as meditation? Or actually my friend Tom, wherever he is, was saying, yeah, but I go to the gym and that's my meditation. And look, they're all ways to relax. That's absolutely fine. But what you need to be aware of is that when you're in meditation, you're actually focused on engaging with your mind. And you're actually limiting distractions because your whole purpose of what you're doing at that time is focused on the mind. So if you're able to garden and get into a mental state where that is where your focus is, that's fantastic. But if you're listening to music or if you're working out and you're thinking about other stuff, you're not meditating. You're relaxing, but you're not actually meditating. Okay, so I really love this quote from Kung Fu Panda. It seems weird that I would be quoting Kung Fu Panda, but I am. And it has this great moment which is kind of funny. Like, obviously I'm a child, and when you watch movies with kids, it's great how sometimes they do like the kid bit and the adult bit. The adults are kind of taking the adult bit. And there's this great point in this where the Kung Fu master, whose name is Wu Wei, who's a turtle, says to the panda, he says this great thing, he says, the past is history, the future is a mystery, but the present is a gift. That's why it's called the present. Is everyone familiar with that quote if you haven't heard it? And I think this is a remarkable thing, that a gift that's been given to us from Kung Fu Panda. Because I think that, I don't know how you guys feel, but so much of my mind is usually taken up with worrying about the past, or worrying about the future, or thinking about what might happen, or thinking about what might not happen, or thinking about what I want to control. And, you know, often it's keeping me up at night, particularly in the context of work. Oh my God, what if I don't crack that brief, you know, and all this sort of stuff. And I think what happens is our mental process is often quite destructive in that regard. You know, we're focusing on stuff and we're not actually getting into the moment. And having worked for many years with creatives, I've often seen creatives paralysed with fear. I don't know, has anybody in the room had that feeling when you're just scared and can't even start and you're going, I've got to do this thing, and I can't even write the first word. And you know, you're so scared, and often it's a terrible feeling. It's this huge feeling of pressure and expectation. And I think it's even worse for creatives than, you know, not the people I was going to say, but you know, the rest of it. Because it's like you've got to produce something brilliant. It's not just like you've got to get something down, you've got to produce something brilliant. And the pressure is often not only just coming from the client or client service or whatever, but it's often coming from yourself as well. Like, you're always your harshest critic. And I really believe that this sort of ego-driven way of approaching creativity is a very negative thing, and it's something that gets entrenched in us from a very, very young age. In fact, I was just talking to Leanne Rossler before about how children don't feel this pressure. Like, if you give them a piece of paper and you ask them to draw, they'll just draw. They haven't kind of yet been put under that pressure of, is it any good, you know? And it's kind of like, it's like school kind of puts you on this journey of, I have to prove myself above others, and like, how intelligent are you? And it's kind of like there's this mental leaderboard. Am I the smartest person, or am I the most creative person? And I actually think it's an incredibly destructive thing. I mean, I had the misfortune of going to a private girls' school, and I feel like I've had to spend my whole life getting rid of that programming. Because it was really competitive, it was really, how smart are you? It was really self-directed, it was very much about, you know, being on this leaderboard and how good are you, and, you know, fortunately I did okay, so that's alright, but, you know, it's kind of like, then later in life you get out there and you get out there with real people and you realise that that competitiveness and that leaderboard and everything is actually incredibly bad for how you need to relate to people. And I think that what happens to all of us is that there becomes this obsession with control, and I don't know if society is becoming more controlling. I certainly feel like it is. You know, and it's this need to control. You know, it's like, I've got to make sure that I got everything under control. If I let go, who knows what's going to happen? You know, I'm going to fail. And it's just such a ridiculous idea. I mean, anyone who has, by my age, you kind of realise that basically everything is out of your control. That there's so little you can control. And that, you know, it's actually quite good when you're prepared to acknowledge that and let go and go, this is actually beyond my control. And so the really great thing about meditation is that it actually helps you to reshape your neurological patterns. So not only does it kind of give you permission to be in the moment, which is a really important thing to do, but it also gives you permission to kind of let go and go, this doesn't have to be about me. I don't have to perform. I don't have to pull out genius. You know, I can just be who I am. I can just deal with what's happening in the moment, and I can not inject so much fear into this. And I think this is really interesting, and one of the things that was really amazing to me when I talked to people about the fact I was doing this talk was how many people had incredible things to contribute to it and told me great stuff that was like, great, this is kind of a gift that I'm getting handed all this stuff that I can incorporate. And one of the things that I got pointed to was about the work that David Lynch is doing, the filmmaker David Lynch. Is anyone familiar with what David Lynch is up to at the moment? He is remarkable. Like, he is a man on a mission. He's formed this foundation, the David Lynch Foundation. He's very modest. And the David Lynch Foundation is on a mission particularly to get meditation into schools, but also to get meditation into universities. And he also has this foundation that helps fund people learn transcendental meditation, because that's a form of meditation he's really into. And so he does this amazing thing. He tours all these universities, and he goes in and he says, okay, well, you all thought I was going to give you a talk. You just have to ask me questions. And they all fire all these questions at him, and what he says is incredibly wise and amazing. But one of the best things that he said that I found really enlightening is that he believes that it's a creation of the French existentialist movement that creatives should suffer. He's kind of like the la boheme idea that there's this poor suffering artist and you have to suffer for your art. And he said it's really great for getting chicks, you know, they come up to your room and there's no heat, you know, they're all late at night. But he said it really doesn't have to be inherent in the creative process that you suffer, unless I guess you want to get chicks. And he said, one of the things he says which I found, you know, a great thing is he said, look, and he should know this, that you can make a film about death without dying, you know, and he's sort of saying, you know, and he answered this question that's really quite, you know, intense when he was going, you know, I write music and I write about suffering and I don't understand how I can do that if I'm not suffering myself. And he's just going, well, you can, you know, like through meditation, you can go to a much more joyful place and hopefully you can create from a position of joy. And it doesn't mean that you can't do something about suffering. It doesn't mean that you can't be empathic to the idea of suffering. It doesn't mean that you can't understand suffering. But you shouldn't see that having pain is inherent to the creative process, and it doesn't have to be. And what he talks about is that through meditation, it kind of gives you a larger net to catch these ideas that are already there. So it helps you get this better net. And once your net is bigger and it's easier to catch the ideas, you're not experiencing as much of that suffering and as much of that pain, you know, that we kind of been all told that creativity is ending. Okay, so now I'm going to ask everyone to do something that, you know, you may not have expected to do tonight, but we are actually going to do some meditation right now. So what I want to ask everyone is to hopefully find somewhere you can sit down, hopefully comfortably. There are some yoga mats over here if you don't feel okay about something else. And I know some of you are probably going to go, I can't get into the right headspace now, I can't meditate, you know, it's like, that's a big ask. Because, you know, it's like, I can't get into the mood, I don't know how many people are in the room, and I'm going to be sitting on the frosted floor, and, you know, it's not what I thought I had to do tonight. But it's kind of like being in the moment, and kind of what I'd like all of you to do is just give it a go. Because the reason why I really want to do this right now is the other thing that I learned from that great monk in Japan, which is that the other thing we become a bit fixated with meditation is I've got to be in the right room, and I've got to be sitting in the right posture, and I've got to have my hands the right way. If I don't have my hands the right way, do you put them on your knees or you cup them, or, you know? And it's like, oh, then my meditation practice is going to be good. But actually, like, you can meditate anywhere. It's actually something that you can do in any place, and you don't have to have this sort of special place or a special posture to be able to do it. So I'm going to make sure that everyone's comfortable. Is everyone sitting down? Is everyone ready? Is there anyone who's not ready? Okay. So we're only going to do it for 5 minutes. So it's going to be really easy. And actually, this is kind of practice for you, because once you've done this 5 minutes, you'll know exactly what you're going to do tomorrow. Okay. So, okay, the first thing is, before we get going, just understanding how to meditate. So, there are lots of different techniques of meditation, but the simplest way of looking at it is to just focus on your breathing. And what you want to do is you want to focus on the sensation of breathing in and out through your nose. And you just breathe normally. Like, people start doing this crazy breathing. It's like, you know, like, it's like you just breathe normally. But when you do your breathing, what I want you to do is I want you to really point your attention onto your breath. And one of the teachers who taught me said, think of it like you're a cat. Fortunately, I have a cat watching a mouse. And you kind of like just, you've got your focus absolutely on that breath. You can open your eyes. Okay. That feel like a long 5 minutes. Alright, I've got some questions. First of all, did anyone see God? Did anyone have an opinion? Welcome to meditation. You won't believe the number of people people in our competitive spirit who kind of want something amazing to happen to them. You know, they think, I'm going to do meditation, something, I'm going to see these amazing magic colours. You know, I'm going to have a vision. All this stuff's going to happen, you know, back to our competitive nature. Who here found that they had thoughts racing through their brain? Oh my God, I've got to do this for work tomorrow. What did I cook this? Anybody here have that going on? Really? Okay, welcome to meditation. You know, most people, when they find they meditate, most people find when you actually slow down and stop and quiet, you see how busy your mind actually is, particularly when you first start, because you realise there are all these thoughts going around your brain. And that's actually called the monkey mind. And, you know, harking back again to the monk that I met in Japan, like he was saying, it's another fallacy that when you first start meditation, you're going to be able to clear your mind. Like people always talk about you meditate to clear your mind. Like it is incredibly hard to clear your mind. And there's a great analogy in the Tibetan book of Living and Dying that talks about that your mind is the sky and that your thoughts are the clouds. And that your thoughts aren't your mind, but that they are constantly flowing through your mind. And sometimes there'll be a very cloudy day and there'll be a lot of thoughts there. And then other times the sky will start to clear and you'll start to understand the nature of mind and you'll start to kind of see things in a different way. In a frost way. And can you... Oh, there you go, in a frost way. How perfect timing. So this could be a wonderful thing. So I guess what I want to say is, like meditation isn't something that instantly transforms your brain or necessarily instantly gives you this divine experience. It's something you have to work at. And it's not something that you're going to necessarily be transformed overnight. And also, many people have to lower their expectations of the experience. I can't tell you how many people say, I can't meditate. I can't do it. It's like, well, what can't you do? You know, it's like actually if you devote yourself to the practice, over time it shows you and you have to find your own thing out of it, the thing that's meaningful to you. But what happens is you do start to encounter the nature of mind. And what I would recommend to all of you, particularly any of you who haven't done meditation, is to find somewhere reputable that isn't going to try and charge you a lot of money or make out that it's a sort of secret thing that you have to pay for. Find somewhere and start on a journey with a good teacher and start to practice. Because as I said, it's just like if you want to learn yoga, and I do a lot of yoga, the first thing that's important is to find a good teacher, you know, and to find someone who can actually help you on your journey. So that 5 minutes is a tiny little introduction. But what I also hope what you learn from it is that everybody in this room can now meditate. You know, so there's nothing to stop you waking up tomorrow morning and instead of spending 15 minutes online or 5 minutes on Facebook or whatever, spend those 5 minutes just doing what you just did then. Like it's a great way to start. And then you can build up over time, you know, maybe making your practice deeper, but you can already do it and you can do it now. Okay, so let's talk a bit more about why meditation and mindfulness are good for the creative practice. And this is something that is quite funny, and I'm really sorry Vince isn't here tonight, but Vince and I often talk about this subject, and he talks about it, and it's well kind of understood, that one of the things that we need to do through meditation is to regain our innocence. I'm really hoping that happens to me soon. And that what we need to do is we need to kind of approach the world like a child. And the thing about a child is, and there are lots of people who write about this, is that they interact in the world with much less elevated consciousness of self, and they kind of don't categorize and they kind of don't judge in the same way, they kind of don't discriminate, and they take it kind of more at face value. And so this kind of desire to get back to this state of innocence and to suspend judgment is a really, really important thing. Like, I think all of us kind of spend a lot of time, like I know I do, and it's really hard to escape back to that private school education. It's really hard to try yourself to stop judging things, to start going, that's good, that's bad, you know, she's good looking, she is, you know, and you get into this pattern of, once again, rating everything and trying to kind of compare everything, rather than kind of going, those things, they just are, they're just what they, you know, those things are, and they're not necessarily, once again, on this kind of scale of what's good and what's bad. And I think this idea of innocence and this idea of being able to approach things from the childlike mind is very, very important for creatives, because there's a lot of danger in seeing yourself as an expert. Because an expert, and assuming that you know, immediately closes off doors. It immediately says, I already know the answer, I've already decided. But often that means that you're closing off so many opportunities that you're not opening yourselves up to possibility. And yet, for creatives to discover new things, you have to be constantly open to the fact that you don't know. And one of the best talks I've been to when I first actually became interested in meditation and mindfulness and Buddhism was this Zen teacher, again, I'm into the Zen, and she did this whole talk about this idea of I don't know, and how confronting it is for us to actually say, I don't know, you know, and that we always feel like we have to have the answer, and we always feel like we have to know the solution, but that there's so much more power in approaching the world from a mental perspective of, actually, I don't know. And one of the things I see in my job is that often I leap to conclusions about things far too quickly, you know, and a lot of my job requires that you're trying to assess stuff and you're trying to put it into perspective and you're trying to figure out how does this all fit together. But sometimes I find that I think I know something far too early in the process and I've got an idea going in my mind and I think it's all about that. And then I have to check myself and I have to go stop and I have to go wait until I've gone through much more of the process. And sometimes that first thought will be still good, but often I find, wow, I was just taking all this stuff that people were saying to me, which was the most face value things of this situation, that probably the client already knew, and I was just getting caught into that. And it's only now that I've heard a much wider perspective, that I've actually gone more deeply into this issue, that I can even start to try and put it into some sort of order and start making any sort of decisions about what is and isn't important. Okay, so why else is meditation important? I think all of us know who are interested in creativity the value of intuition, the importance of the intuitive mind. And I often say that my job at Frost is to be, you know, the logical person and the creative's job is to be the intuitive person. And, you know, and I actually don't believe in that divide of roles so much. I think that we can all be both. But there's no doubt that intuition is fundamental for the creative process. And a couple of months ago, my son came home from school really, really excited. He said, Mum, you've got to watch this documentary. It's about this guy called Einstein. And he's like really excited. He's going, you know, this guy, he was amazing. I thought, yeah, some of us have heard of Einstein before, Dash, you know. Anyway, but he was very, very excited. But it was really interesting because I felt like I knew quite a lot about Einstein, but I actually found out I knew very little. And watching this documentary, what I found so interesting was that Einstein would spend an enormous amount of time just thinking and daydreaming. And it's actually kind of thought that the whole theory of relativity was something that he kind of just daydreamed. And he talks about the importance of intuition. And one of his friends was interviewed in this documentary, and she said the amazing thing about Einstein was that he could hold in his mind at one time very diverse perspectives of the world, and he could see all of these different ways of looking at the world, but he could hold them in his mind in a oneness, in a sense of totality. And that's very much what you're trying to do in your meditation practice, is to kind of see the multiplicity in everything, but also see the oneness in everything. And so I love this quote. The intuitive mind is a sacred gift, and the rational mind is a faithful servant. We've created a society that honours the servant and has forgotten the gift. And I think as creatives, this is an incredibly powerful quote for us, because I believe that a lot of the time that we spend online, that we're spending on the internet, is feeding that very rational following process rather than that freer, daydreaming, letting go process. And I must say, Alex, where's Alex? He's got to be here. Alex, who helped me with my talk, very, very clever, amazing creative. Just happened to notice that not only is Einstein, he's this guy. Why was he so smart? He had 2 leads in his name, you know? We had it nailed. You know, actually, as an aside, one of the things that I was appalled about when I saw the documentary was when Einstein died, they actually removed his brain and wanted to figure out why he was so smart, and they actually did it without the consent of his family. And eventually they had to kind of put that brain back, which I'm very glad they did, but people used to do crazy things. But, I mean, look at this quote. This is from many, many years ago, and yet it feels even more true today than at that time, you know. Okay, so I'm going to have to try to be quite different. So the next thing I want to talk about is indirectness. And with meditation, one of the things that's not such a good thing to do is go, I've got this brief, I'm going to meditate on it and see if I can figure out the answer. Like, it kind of doesn't work that way. You can't kind of try and plug a brief into meditation and see if it'll pump out a solution the other end, you know? So, and I myself find that my best ideas usually come when I'm in the shower or, you know, when I'm just about to go to sleep, and the most inopportune times. And it's usually because they're the times when you've kind of given your brain permission to relax about something and let your intuition work on it and just let your inner being work on it, rather than kind of forcing yourself down the barrel of it. So this idea of indirectness is a very important thing and something that meditation really helps us do. Okay, so insight. So one of the other things we're talking about in terms of mental imaging and research that's able to be done now into the brain is that it's actually proven that the brain helps us with insight, and it actually helps us to, sorry, I'm just thinking forward so I don't get this wrong, to become more empathic. And what's happened is, as I said, there's places like UCLA who actually have centres that are dedicated to mindfulness and are doing lots of research with Zen monks and people who do, you know, very deep meditation. And what they found is that mindfulness really helps us to connect to our intuition. And why this is really important is, particularly when you become a professional creative, often you need to be able to connect with that intuition and that insight quite quickly. You need to be able to access it. So they found that what happened was meditation actually impacts on a particular part of the brain. And that particular part of the brain is an area that relates to empathy, to how we can relate to others. And guess what that part of the brain is called? Insular cortex. I kid you not. And this is a part of the brain that actually helps us to be empathic towards others, to have sensitivity. So, you know, it's actually also helping us in that regard. And I think this is, oh, that's so clever, you know. I've got this great idea, you know, and I'm pretty much a victim of that. I like to come up with great ideas. I love the joy of having ideas. It's a fantastic feeling. But learning to be sensitive towards other people, learning how to interact effectively with them, is actually going to produce a much better creative result. And so learning how to interact, learning how to be sensitive to others is another really important thing. And so what's really important about meditation and mindfulness is it isn't just about being introspective. It's not just about looking into yourself and going, great, this is going to make me better at coming up with ideas, and soon I'm going to be like David Lynch and I'm going to be amazing. It's also about how you interact with others, how you become more aware of other people's perspectives and how you're able to do that effectively so that it produces the best result. And there's this really fantastic book called Leadership Beyond Good Intentions that if you can get your hands on, I'd really highly recommend. And it talks about what's called adaptive leadership. And adaptive leadership is based on this idea that there used to be a very kind of militaristic model of leadership, that you have a leader who's kind of the boss, and they tell everybody else what to do, and everybody follows you know, what that leader tells you, and it's the military model, and you need everyone to fall in line, or otherwise they're going to get killed, you know. So that's kind of where a lot of our leadership practice used to come from. But adaptive leadership is a very different way of approaching that. And one of the core ideas within adaptive leadership is that the situation itself develops the wisdom. And that if you are open to that situation and you're open to the others that are in that situation, that you can trust that that situation itself and your interaction with the others in it will lead to the right solution. And I guess this really fundamentally comes back to this idea of letting go and kind of mastering your own ego in your interaction with others, and kind of having this trust and trusting that it will come. You know, and sometimes that can be really scary in a creative environment, you know, and sometimes you're going, when's the great idea going to come? You know, like, I can't tell you how many times we've worked on projects where you're still waiting and it's the night before and it's like, come on. But it always happens. It's amazing. It always does. And I think it particularly happens when you trust the team you're working with and when you all support each other. And I guess this leads me to the next thing that I think is very, very important, and that's the need to be kind. And I think that this is something that, you know, meditation obviously teaches us, is that kindness is very, very important in a creative environment. And I think this is one of the big struggles we all have, is sometimes when you're under pressure, when you're wanting people around you to produce something, to actually decide to be kind. To decide to be kind to those around us, so that when I see a creative struggling, I hope the colleagues I work with, I try and always back off now. I used to be one of those people who go, who said, let's do this time, where is it, deliver. And now I've kind of realised that I need to be kind in those situations. The kindness is going to produce a much better result than kind of putting pressure on. And it's not only being kind to whoever has to produce at that time and getting them a cup of tea and understanding what might help them, or even just letting them talk about what they're thinking. It's also sometimes being kind to yourself and going, like I was saying before, going, well, maybe I'm not going to be able to crack this one. Maybe I need to ask somebody else to help me, rather than feeling like I have to do it. That really ego-invested idea that I'm going to solve it, that I'm going to come up with a piece of creative genius and the client's going to think I'm brilliant, This need for kindness, obviously, is not just something that's important for us as creatives. It's a really important thing for us in how we conduct ourselves in all parts of our lives. But for me, in creative environments, I think it's incredibly important. And I think that people, when they're under intense, pressured situations, will always respond positively to kindness. Okay, we're getting towards the end now. Thank you for being patient. Okay, so one last thing I want to talk about is intention. And I think I said at the beginning I do quite a bit of yoga. And one of the things you always do in your yoga practice is at the beginning, you think about somebody else. And you create an intention, and you focus your attention on somebody else, and you focus your intention, and you think about what you're trying to get out of that beyond just, doing exercise. And I think intention is a really, really important thing for us as creatives. The intention you take into any situation is critical. If you're going, I've just got to knock this piece of shit out because the client needs it and they've told me they want it in half an hour, that's what you're going to produce. You're going to produce that piece of shit the client said you can only do in half an hour. If you go into a situation where it's like, oh, I'm doing this to please my boss, or I'm doing this, for this reason, and your intention isn't a high intention, well, intention dictates the result. So it's very, very important for us to always be looking at our intention. And one of the things I find really interesting, not just in my work life, but in all my life, is that whenever I really fuck up, it's usually unintentional. I've usually pissed somebody off or whatever, and I haven't even realised that that was what was happening. Is that true to your experience too? Fuck-ups are usually because of a lack of intention. And I guess this is when it brings me back to mindfulness. That if you are slowing yourself down, that if you are truly having an intention in situations, that if you're truly thinking about why you're doing what you're doing, as well as what you're trying to produce, it can really connect you to a higher purpose, and it can also keep you really focused on why you're doing what you're doing, rather than just creating an output. Okay, so I'm going to end tonight with an invitation. And that invitation is to, take what it is on board that kind of makes sense to you. And I think the things that I kind of want to really reinforce is, sorry, I had to write this down so I wouldn't forget, is really paying attention to being in the moment, to being in the present moment, to kind of be in that moment with openness though, and without ego, and with curiosity and a willingness to learn and to be with what is, to let that situation dictate the wisdom. And to just stop and to breathe and observe and to connect with your inner experience. And to use that inner experience to be truly creative, because it's inside of all of us. And when we started looking, all of these words that are important to the creative process, like inspiring, investigating, innovative, insight, inventing, being independent, intelligent, original, individual, inspire, all of these words, the clue is there. It's about going in. I actually put it on. Angela did that for me. I didn't know she'd done it. She's very clever. Okay. We're going to get back to the internet, because we started this talk talking about the internet, and look at this. The word in is the internet. So as I said at the beginning, the internet is not the enemy. The enemy is how we use the internet. And I think that the problem is that often, if we're using the internet to short-circuit the creative process, to find inspiration that we don't take the time to look into ourselves, then I think that it kind of isn't really the internet. The internet that I'm talking about. If you can use it to expand your consciousness, if you can use it to expand your understanding of the multiplicity of opportunity, of understanding the potential that's in the world, that's one thing. I think if you're using the internet as a source of ideas and a source of finding creative direction that you don't find within yourself, it's kind of working against what it really could. And I guess my parting thought is that that's kind of who we are as human beings, is to be in ourselves. That's what gives us our greatest potential. That's what's exciting about being a creative, is that you're using you and you're being in the moment in yourself. That's it. About 4 years, and it's quite funny because I reckon most people only get into meditation or mindfulness or whatever when their life enters disaster, like I did. I've had lots of disasters since then, and I've been so grateful that that particular disaster, which wasn't the worst disaster, like as I said, yeah, it was at a time where I was kind of in a bit of a personal crisis, and I needed to do something to make sense of all of that, you know, and I've got to say, like, I have over those 4 years been very inconsistent. It's probably only been the past 2 years that I have been pretty consistently meditating, and I've really got to say, when I do it every day, it really works, and then I get out of doing it, and for some, you know, my life takes over for whatever reason, and I get out of doing it, and then the moment I get back into doing it, it's like, feel good again, you know, it really is like that sort of thing that you can do that really helps you. And it doesn't only make you feel good on an emotional level, it gives you resources that you don't know are there, and it does truly help you to be more expansive in how you think about stuff, you know, because we don't realise how narrow-minded we are. I mean, one of the things that I was going to say, but I forgot to, so I can say it now, is that David Lynch talks about, you know, imagine your mind has a golf ball-sized consciousness, and you're going into every situation, and your consciousness is the size of a golf ball, and that's okay. Like, you're still responding to everything with that size of consciousness. But then think about the potential to expand that consciousness and to just keep expanding it. And the reality is, you know, we do only have a golf ball-sized consciousness most of the time, and you know, and then as you work on it, you realise how limited your consciousness was before you started to actually work on trying to make it more expansive. You know, and this goal of having an expansive mind that can see limitlessness in everything, but also oneness in everything. It's a truly amazing feeling and sensation, and you know, that's why you get people like me who stand up here and become very passionate about the subject, because it's a remarkable thing to work towards, and it is hard work. And I would never say that I am an expert, but I would like to say I am a practitioner, and I try to work hard at it. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. I'm going to end tonight. I wanted to play this song because anyone who knows me knows I am a huge Beatles fan, and I pay tribute to the Beatles. I really think that without them, we probably wouldn't have been exposed to meditation nearly as much as we have been. And when I was about 6 or 7, I bought my first record, and it was Sgt. Pepper's, good choice. And I conned my younger brother into giving me $2 so we could afford it. It was $7 at the time. And I still have it. He's never claimed his share, which is very good. And but when I had it, it was in the days of records, and I used to play the first side, very happy with that. And then I'd turn it over. The first track, the second side was Within You Without You by George Harrison. It's like, oh my God, what is that hippie shit? Or the equivalent. I had it in my head when I was that age, like I just did not get it. And it was like, oh man, it's terrible, you know? What is that music? It's all that Indian. Oh, couldn't stand it. And so I used to always skip Within You Without You. And then I get on to When I Was 64. Now I do the other way around. Anyway, and at the time I just wasn't ready. And then a couple of years ago, one of my friends gave me the Martin Scorsese documentary about George Harrison. Has anybody seen it? It's remarkable. It's fantastic. It's really, really good. And it's called Living in the Material World. And I think kind of George Harrison himself was a bit like the Beatle that everyone kind of skipped over, like I used to skip over that track. You know, he was like a very remarkable composer. He was, in the course of his time in the Beatles, he really seriously became very involved in meditation and he was a member of the Hare Krishna movement, and he also was the first one to put on, I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of Bangladesh, which was like well before the World A, and he really was a remarkable person. And I think it was interesting because at that time when my friend gave me that movie, it was at the perfect time for me to really discover George Harrison. You know, I actually at that time was going through quite a hard time in my life. And like, I just learned so much from listening to his music, and I learned so much from just even seeing that documentary. So I thought it was appropriate tonight to just play one of these tracks. And it's actually called Begin Alive, which is fantastic. And it's actually based around a poem that someone sent him that was based about Taoist philosophy. I'm sure you've heard about it, which is very much about duality, and you know, it has a lot of the philosophy is very similar to the sorts of things that you consider in Buddhist practice and in meditation. So I just want to leave all of you with this track because it's a track that I really love, and I hope you like it too. I hope I can get it to play.